Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good day to Mr. Hisham. As for our speaking assignment, we were given a task regarding to have a small talk about topic from one of our English General Communication Weekly team. So we are from conference group. Pleasantly wants to share about the topic of the mental illness stigma from the mental health team. So my name is Hayatul Nayli Binti Mohamed Fishal, host a metric number of 2013-42472 from Industrial Chemical Process Program.
I'm Nurhasnun Binti Mohamed Noor, by matrix number 201342-306. Imagine if our society blamed people for being diagnosed with cancer, claiming it was their life choice that had led to such a terrible disease. Sound horrifying, right? Imagine putting the added burden, that shame on the someone who is fighting for their life. This happens every day too, not to victim of cancer, but to victim of mental illness. Despite the fact that one in formulation suffer from some form of mental illness, people suffering from mental illness are continually stigmatized and ostracized by society. This stigma causes severe harm by dehumanizing those who have a mental disorder. It will making it harder for the mental ill to admit their symptom to another and seek treatment. And it will making people think that those who have a mental disorder are inherently dangerous, and that all people who suffer from them commit crime. So, let's look at the sum of the effect of mental illness.
Thanks for Hasnun from your content. Now my turn. First, my name is Aqidah Binti Yusop. I will talk about several harm by dehumanizing those who has mental disorder. There are numerous ways in which people who suffer from a mental illness are degraded and shamed. One primary method that most people do not even consider is the fact that people are often referred to as a schizophrenic, rather than someone who has schizophrenia, or state that someone is depressed instead of has depression. The effect of this is to make it seem as if the fact that a person suffered from a mental disorder negates their humanity. It makes it seem as if the disorder is all encompassing and make them less than human when this is not the case. There are three main themes of prejudicial attitudes against those who has mental disorders: fear and exclusion, authoritarianism, and virtue. The first theme is the idea that people with several mental illness should be fair and keep out of most communities. Authoritarianism is the concept that people who has mental disorders are irresponsible and so need life decisions to be made by others, while welfare is thinking that persons with several mental illness are babies and need to be cared for. The common element connecting all three themes is the basic idea that people who has a mental illness are somehow less than people who do not. In all three themes, people with the mental disorders are subject to being shamed and looked down upon from something that they did not cause. Additionally, people who has no personal experience with mental disorders admit to feeling uncomfortable dating or having as a neighbor someone who has a mental disorder. There is also the belief that people diagnosed with mental illness can never be normal. This, however, is yet another myth perpetuated by the mental illness stigma. It is attitude and prejudice similar to this one that has led to federal funding for mental hospitals and care often being one of the first things to be cut from the budget. This then leads to a vicious cycle which continues the stigma. Since less care is available for those with mental disorders, they have trouble dealing with their disorders and functioning as a part of society, which then leads to the belief that the mental ill cannot and never will be normal.
Yet, another detriment caused by this stigma is the difficulty the mentally ill face in order to admit their symptom and also seek for treatment. So, those who suffer from mental illness or suspect they have won't avoid seeking treatment for fear of being labeled crazy and all the shame, stigma, and mental illness. Less than 1/3 of adults with a diagnosable mental disorder receive mental health services per year, as reported by the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Furthermore, some with mental illnesses isolate themselves or are abandoned by friends and family. This is due to the stigma and shame that surrounds mental illness, mostly the idea that mental illness is somehow a character defect caused by the person's upbringing or their attitude. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, some people would rather tell employers that they committed a petty crime and serve time in prison rather than admit to being admitted to psychiatric hospital. Thus, people would rather be thought to be a convicted felon than someone who suffered from a severe mental illness that required treatment yet committed no crime. It is this attitude that makes it difficult for people with mental illnesses to seek treatment and for doctors to discuss about the mental illness with the patient.
It is a problem that have led to make people think those who have a mental disorder are inherently dangerous and commit crimes. This perception have worsened after Newton, Connecticut mass shooting due to the major publicity about the shooter's possible mental illness being large factor. They ignore the other factors that may be cause this problem, such as youth, socioeconomic status, and prevalence of violence in the media. A mass shooter's mental illness is often used as a scapegoat to ignore other factors and to show that the shooter wasn't normal. Well, it is understandable to distance ourselves as a human being from a person capable of just atrocities. This technique of blaming the mental disorder perpetuates the idea that mental ill are likely to commit such acts. This is most certainly not the case. In fact, a quarter of Americans suffer from a mental illness. Only 5% of crimes are committed by those who are mentally ill. This is lower rate than the juvenile offender who commit 13% of crimes. Furthermore, few of the crimes actually committed by those with a mental disorder are violent or dangerous. Most are petty crimes caused by their symptom or socio-economic situation. The reality is, the people who have mental disorder are likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators. Some people view them as unsafe. Those are more likely to react violently.
In my opinion, having a mental illness is something that nothing to be ashamed of. As the time flies, the person will be held slowly but surely. But somehow, we have to take this as a serious matter, as we always heard that the one who fail to deal with their mental illness end up with suicide. I hope that we as a good friend will always care for each other and always help and support our friend who suffered with the mental illness.
So, in conclusion, the stigma of mental illness harms society by regarding people who suffer from mental disorder, causing the idea for being mentally ill to the shameful or embarrassing, and promoting the idea that the mental ill is hazardous. This is shown by the general feeling of discomfort felt by most Malaysians around people who mental disorder and the lack of the federal funding for the mental hospital, along with the media focus on the mental illness as a factor in crime. Despite the prevalence of this stigma, there are various factors that can be used to reduce it and change the general public attitude, such as protest, education, and contact. The only way that the stigma can truly be eradicated through is to treat mental illness like what they are. So, we hope that mental illness problem can be reduced in Malaysia. That's all from our group. Thank you.